Hi, welcome to In the Studio with DJ Robtech on my brand new song, Hear Me Now. Alright, so this is the radio edit of Hear Me Now, and the song started with the piano, so let's bring up the piano. So, key of this one is A minor. So I had the piano and then I built up the melody for it. The piano itself is using Noir, which is a Native Instruments one, which looks like this and works pretty well. Then I've got my melody with a bit of automation on opening up the cutoff. I play around with the automation throughout the whole song. For that I'm using Icarus, which is a pretty cool synth. And I've got that layered with the bass, so I've got two basses in this. I've got a mid bass, which is a serum patch. And then I've got a driving bass, which is more of a trancey bass, which I'm using the Polymax for. It's more of that trance bass, but because it's at a 126 BPM, it ends up being more of a melodic techno bass. But it's using the Polymax for that. I've got another, like a lead that comes in with the other lead. So I've got two leads. I've got this other one. And that works really well with the other lead. I use that in the build, up into the drop, and then in the drop I've got my big stab, and my stabs are so there's my stabs, and most of my work that I do is all in audio and audio processing. So this is just the basic, the MIDIs that I've got. Some extra cool stuff like sub drops, which is just this one. So if I open up the MIDI for it, it's A1, a -1. If I go to like A2, I get my sub drop sound, which is a cool effect. When you take everything out, the sub drop comes in. I've got other arpeggios, using Electra for this arpeggio. Then I've got my distorted pads, which are also pretty cool. So we'll start with this one. As it slowly rises. And then that one's backed with another one, which is really distorted. They're both serum. Sub-oscillator going through distortion. I use them as kind of like an effect pad that rises. Then I create a structure, and then most of my work is all done on audio. So we start from the very beginning, we can get into drums and percussion. How it starts off with, I have a reverse kick, goes into the main kick drum, and I've got claps. Let's have a look at the kick. One thing I liked about this kick is how I have like the stereo delay on it. And because the stereo delay is also band passed into a really small, like a mid part of the kick, it gives me a really cool driving rhythm which works well with the bass. Then I've got driving hi-hats, I've got main open hat, I've got claps. And then under it, like for example up here, all of these ones, and this, and so on, is all my automation. So for the clap, I've got 2 lots of automation on reverb and frequency, which means I can use that as a filter. Then I've got a clap, and then I've duplicated the channel, put lots of reverb on it, and then created this, which has also got going through a compressor. Then I've got the attack from the clean sample, and then that's layered with a snare. This is like the hit before the drop. So this is snare, then it all comes together like a big sound. More hats in the percussions, and open hi-hat here, different one, which is where a kick drum would normally be, and a perk loop on top of that. I also have a snare build, which is what I use to build up everything. So altogether I get a very like housey sort of backbone to the song, so our beat is quite housey. Then I'll build it up here. And then the second build is always bigger than my first build. I always want my second drop to have something extra, so it doesn't sound the same. So this is my second build. So what makes it bigger in this case is I add in a kick drum, and I duplicate the track, put a fuck ton of reverb on it, and it sounds like that. And then I've gated at the very end, so it doesn't get interfered in the drop. So I get this very big sound. Then I add in all the rest of my hits, and then I add in another hit, which gives me the higher part of the snare. So snare, clap, kick. This big wall of sound for the second drop. And now we've got the basses. So I've got the main bass, and I've got LFO tool on it, which gives you the sidechain pumping. I've got twin tube SPL, which gives you extra saturation harmonics. I turn it off. Comes through a bit better in the mix, and then EQ. Pretty much boosting the high mid and taking out the low mid. Then I've got the mid bass, which is my driving bass. On that again, another twin tube. Which gives it extra harmonics to that. And then again I have that LFO tool to give it the sidechain effect. Then of course got my sub drop, which is cool. And then I've got melody. So my melodies. And then I open the cutoff on it, and then I bring in my next melody, which has got a lot more processing on it with pretty much the Saturn, which gives me saturation and excitement. Then in the drop, I've got my stabs that come in. And then my art, which comes in at the next verse, yeah. Then I've got my piano. And my two pad sounds, which I was using in the build-up sections. Then a lot of effects, which is up sweeps, down sweeps. And then a big riser in the second build. Then the vocals. So the vocals I've got in different folders for different sections. So I've got the verse vocals, which is of course the main one.
Won't you set me free? Let my scars open. Same old memories. I'm bound to be broke.
Which have then got their own processing from going through a Tube Tech compressor, another Lindell channel strip. My favourite one is the 9099, which is another cool channel strip. De-esser, and then a soothe, and then all my send effects of reverbs and delays. And then I got the pre-chorus, which is a slightly different sound.
I can't take this any longer. I just need some clarity. Keep my eyes wide shut, then maybe I can bring you back to me.
Go through some saturated there, and then I've got my chorus.
Can you hear me now? Lost in the silence. Let me feel you now. Give me ultraviolence. Can you hear me now?
And a lot of automations on my chorus vocals, and then my effects vocals at the end. Which sound pretty cool. So I just give it extra kind of a riser, but instead of just another white noise riser, it gives me a toned vocal riser. Sounds pretty cool. So in different sections, with the drums, percussion and bass, I get this sort of a vibe. So it's quite housey, and then the type of bass I'm using makes it more trancey. So different sort of flavour. And then on top of that, I bring in my synths. And then behind that, I keep my percussion loop there, which keeps the rhythm driving in the song. I start off, I've got the reverse piano, into the main piano. Then I take out the sidechain off the piano. And then I bring the sidechain back in. Then on top of that, I bring in the melodies to work with the piano. stabs come in for the main drop.
Won't you say
Come with the undercursus of the vocals and then into the main verse.
no memories? I'm better be broken again. I can't take this any longer. I just need some clarity. Keep my eyes wide shut, and maybe I can break it back to me. Can you hear me now?
And to fatten up my drums, I also have my HG2, which sounds pretty decent. Zoom in a bit. Gives it a lot of extra saturation. Nice. And then on the bass, I have the J37 tape. Kind of fattens up the low mid of the bass there, which is quite nice. Most of the synths I did on the individual synths themselves. But I put the up is quite nice. Yeah, just a twin tube on that one. A lot of extra saturation on it. And my EQ, keeping the high mids and getting rid of the low mids. It's a lot of extra excitement when I open up that saturator, which is quite cool. I've also added in another saturator, the same one on my other melody. Really brings it out a lot more. And then Stabs was the other one, which I only have a bit of EQ on, just to try and tame some of the real high stuff by taking it down, keeping the low mids down, low end down, and the high mids have a bit of a boost. So that just means it comes through a bit better in the mix. I didn't do much on the pads, I did everything on individual tracks. So on the piano, I've got automation on the LFO tool as well as some of the gain, because some places I needed more volume. And to take out the LFO tool when I wanted a quieter breakdown part. So this part's cool. This is like another like pre-chorus section. And so what I did with that was I got the harmony of the chorus that was singing lower than the main one and decided to make that more of an intimate vibe in this part of the song. Took everything out, kept the piano.
Let me feel you now. Give me ultraviolence.
And then it starts to rise into the big drop at the end.
Find us in the silence. Let me feel you now. Give me ultraviolence.
So if I build it without the riser, the riser really adds in the extra final harmonic. So I got that harmony one below the main one in the chorus.
Can you hear me now? Rise in the silence. Let me feel it now.
And that's why I used just that particular one by itself before the second drop, because it really gave it that intimate vibe. And then I just used that with the piano, which sounded really cool, before a huge rise into the big drop. And then here we've got ad-libs at the end. I repeated the melodies again and put the ad-libs on top of it. So what I did at the very end, if I open up all my drum automations, the hats and the claps, yeah, so hats and the claps, I did it. And I just kind of took off all the high end as a filter. So low pass the filter until an end. Doubled the kick and then added in a clap verb, a kick verb, and the kick, which gives it a lot of extra impact at the end. And then I cut everything off before that. So it ends with like a really big impact, which is kind of cool. Just getting the right groove happening with the drums and percussions, getting the right groove happening with the bass as well, because I chose to do this sort of a bass groove vibe. Which is like a typical uplifting trance bass. Then got my piano melody and want my piano to work with my main melodies and created the groove with that. And of course my lead melody has Anacrusis on it. So it comes in just before. And then we've got automations on the filter cutoff to open it and close it to make it sound a little bit more interesting than stagnated. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole song. And then of course a lot of my effects are all send effects. I use mainly for groups and a bit on the individual tracks. On the vocal I've got short rooms and plates, mainly just delays and reverbs. But that's pretty much everything that I've done in Hear Me Now. Thank you for joining me in the studio for the breakdown of my new song Hear Me Now. It's available on all streaming platforms as well as my website robjrecords.com.